Hello, this is Stephanie Kirk from Maryville, Tennessee. It's about 2 minutes early, but I did want to come in and let you know that we're here. So we'll give it a few more minutes, see if we get some more visitors, and then we'll get started talking about our AP Language and Composition exam overview. What we're going to do today is look at some of the new changes to the AP Language and Composition exam. So this does include the 2019-2020 changes. So please take note of some of the differences. This is important because the final information for teachers wasn't really available or released in time for many of the test prep companies to be able to update their information for this school year. So while we will start to see different resources come out, we want to make sure that we're visiting the AP site and making sure that we are right on what we want to do. And of course, you can ask your teacher questions as well. So first of all, this stream is part of Fiveable, where your success is our goal. Please make sure you're following us on social media so that you can get all of the fancy updates about all of our streams to help you on your way to a 5. In this stream, what we're going to do is we're going to just kind of give a little generic introduction. We're going to talk about the date. Does anyone know what that date is? Can you tell me in the chat? Well, we'll look at it here in just a minute. And then we're going to talk about multiple choice, and that's where the bulk of our changes occurred. And then we're going to look at the free response questions. The rubrics did change, but not that much has changed in terms of what those questions actually look like. And then we're going to talk about some different resources right there at the end. So rolling right around, you want to check with your school to save the date. So the AP new online interface has been rumored to really help with test registration, but you want to clarify this information with your school because when you signed up for AP Classroom, you should have selected that you were going to take that test. So additionally, the payment for the test has been moved up. So you want to make sure that you know how to pay and when to pay so that you don't roll around and it be too late for you to get the test or that credit that you so desperately deserve. You want to check on your arrival time as well. Your AP teacher and your school should be able to give you this information. The total test time is 3 hours and 15 minutes. You want to make sure that you go to the right place as well. So, anybody see that date? It is May the 13th at 8 a.m. So it is another Wednesday, just like every time. When you get ready to take that test, we have a few things we want you to think about. First of all, don't talk about the test. Don't post about the test and don't fret about the test. We're going to help you out along the way, but there are students who have talked about the test or tweeted about the test and had their scores thrown out. So don't be the one who does that. When you take this test, you do sign that it is a secure document and that you're going to keep it that way. So keep that in mind as you move forward. So for multiple choice, you have 45 questions in 1 hour, and that's going to be 45% of your total exam score. So this is actually going to be the biggest change that we see in the AP language exam. So is anyone familiar with what about these questions are going to change? Can you tell me down in the chat? Anyone have any ideas? The biggest change, I think, is the decrease in the number of questions. 10 less questions, that's right. So the biggest change is going to be that decrease in the number of questions. It was previously a 52 to 55 question thing, but there will be 5 passages instead of 4. So we're going to look at those tonight so we kind of see what that looks like. You do have the reading questions that ask you to read and analyze nonfiction text. And then you have writing questions, and these are new. But these are going to ask you to read like a writer. And those are the exact words from the AP Language and Composition course exam and description. So that is what we're looking at. They want you to look at revisions to a text. And it's supposed to look a lot like the PSAT and that sort of stuff as you move in toward taking those tests. So the CED outline, basically the new skill categories are here for you. So in your new skill categories, you have the rhetorical situation, which is divided into, actually all of them are divided into the reading section and the writing section, and they carry a different weight. So I wanted to make sure that we just kind of quickly talked about that. With the rhetorical situation, it's going to be 11 to 14% of your test. and that's going to carry that weight. With the claims and evidence for reading, it's going to be 13 to 16, and writing, it's going to go back to that 11 to 14. Next, we're going to be looking at reasoning and organization, and in reading, you're looking at 13 to 16, but in writing, you're looking at 11 to 14. And then, of course, style, reading and writing questions, both are going to be 11 to 14%. So notice the way that I've given these numbers in the description. So you've got rhetorical situation 1 and rhetorical situation 2. Those are going to be important as we look at the next step. So has anyone gone over these skill categories with your teachers or looked them up online? Can you give me like a thumbs up in the chat to tell me so I kind of have an idea? Well, they're important because when we look at the skill arrangement in the assessment, what that's going to look like, we have set, okay, thumbs down. Well, we've got you covered. So when you're looking at it, based on the question sets, now remember it's 5 instead of 4, but we've been told that it's going to be a shorter passage. So, hey, listen, I had to learn this too. I understand completely. So with these sets, you're going to have the first one, 1 and 2 are going to look at the reading section of the test. So that's the numbers 1, 3, 5, and 7. And of course, you'll have access to all of this information so that you can see what that looks like. So you have 11 to 14 questions on each of those sets, and those are going to look just at reading, which I think is a very strong point because you can get in your brain that you're going to be looking just at reading. And once you're thinking about those reading questions, you'll start to recognize some of the question stems. You'll then transition into the writing skills. And so that'll be 7 to 9 in passages 3 and 4, and then 4 to 6 in the last passage, so that you can kind of see what that looks like. So what I want to do just really quickly for you is if you look back over here, maybe take a screenshot of that. I'll smile for you. This just gives you an idea. Now, of course, you can go to the AP College Board page and pull up that new course description. And I highly recommend that. It's not intended for students. It's definitely intended for teachers, but it is available as a PDF for the entire world. And you'd be amazed how much information you can get from taking that document and reading through it and truly understanding what is going on. So, any questions over the categories or the number of passages? All right, we're going to keep going. I tend to talk really fast. So yes, okay, I see what you're saying. The CED is a resource that should be used by students and teachers 100%. I tell all of my students, I actually have that on my class page for my students, and that is something that you want to be able to access and to link to. Okay. So we have a few sample question stems. Now, when you look at the CED, they are going to start on page 126, giving you sample questions along the way. So I wanted to just kind of let you see what some of these stems are. And you'll actually find practice questions in that course document on the College Board webpage. But I wanted to make sure that we kind of addressed a few of those here. So anybody looked at the questions or talked about it, how those questions might be different? While we're breaking it down, if we look at these questions, the first thing that we see immediately is which of the following best describes the writer's exigence. So this is vocabulary that we see that is actually new in the CED this year because exigence wasn't something on which we would focus in the past. So with this year, a lot of your teachers are going to be taking that soapstones idea and bringing it together with this acronym for SpaceCat or aspects, which we'll cover in one of my live streams later. And you are looking at what is the reason that the person, what is the reason that the person did it? It's kind of like, why now? Why this time? Or I like to explain it to my students. We were talking about like this song comes on the radio. And if your parents are in the car, you turn it off. And the reason you turn it off is because your parents are in the car. But if it's just you and your friends, you turn it up because you like the song and they're not going to judge you for those words or for that content. But then if it's your baby sister in the car, you're going to turn it off for a completely different reason. You're going to change the channel because you're trying to protect her a little bit. So in a weird way, we are taking away a lot of the vocabulary questions that are kind of ambiguous in the text, but we're adding in questions like this. So we want to make sure that we know all of those aspects of Space Cat or aspects or Soapstone 2019, whichever acronym your teacher is going to use. So next one is in the opening paragraph, the writer contrasts whatever, primarily in order to, and then achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve. So again, this is just kind of a stem to let you see what it looks like in this case. That is a reading question as well. And then you've got in context, lines or paragraph or whatever could be used to support which of the following claims about the writer's tone. So this is another one of those reading level questions that's looking at your claim and your evidence. But of course, it's got multiple layers, just like every fantastic AP question, because you've also got to be able to recognize that idea of tone. So the next questions I have on here are samples from the writing ones. So these are the ones that are super new. Which of the following, if placed wherever, so it might be if placed after sentence 2 or at the beginning of paragraph 1, would both capture the audience's interest and provide the most effective introduction to the topic or to a specific thing. So you will be actually looking at what's in the text and then kind of determining, does this other piece work when I try to put it in here, or does it not work at all? And then the next writing question is, our sample writing question would be in sentence blank or in paragraph blank, the writer wants an effective transition from the introduction to the main idea. Which of the following best achieves this purpose? So again, a writing type question that's going to help you out along the way, but you want to make sure that you're used to and familiar with these stems. So you're going to find those starting on page 126 in that course and exam description. Okay, do you feel like a little bit better about multiple choice? Can you show me how you feel on our chat? I understand. It's very overwhelming. And even for us as instructors, when they started talking about the change, we were kind of like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? How am I going to make it happen? But once you really get into it and you start looking at it, you're going to be able to break it down. It will be challenging, but I love the way that it helps you to truly understand, number one, what am I expected to do? And then number two, how am I going to demonstrate that mastery? What's the success criteria on the AP exam? So that document will totally help you. The thumbs up emoji. That's okay. I'm new to emojis as well. So like when I was putting stuff together, I was like, what emoji says this? So we can work it out. We'll work through it together. Okay. Are you ready to look at the next thing? Okay. So free response. When we are looking at free response, this is sort of the same because the question types are there, but we do have a little bit of a difference in the way that it's graded. So has anybody looked at the rubric? Can you like show me on the rubric? Have you looked at the new rubrics? Do you know what the question types are? How do you feel about the free response part of this assessment? Okay. So let's look at the logistics of what are we doing here. It is a little bit cumbersome. So when you are looking at it, you're going to have 3 questions in 2 hours and 15 minutes. Now that is earmarked as a 15-minute reading period. And I encourage my students to make sure that you use that time wisely. You want to read through all parts of it. So the prompt, the passages, even the synthesis. You really want to apply the strategies that you're learning in class so that you're preparing yourself very well for your essays. And that includes making a plan because it's recommended that you only spend 40 minutes per essay. And that doesn't sound like a lot. But this is also 55% of your exam score. So I have some students who are like, well, you know what, Ms. Kirk, multiple choice is not my theme. I am going to bank on looking at the free response. I know I can write a really good essay. I can write a really strong essay, and that's going to carry me. And if that's your plan, that's great. But you also want to make sure that you're in alignment with all of the other areas and see where your progress is and make sure that you are monitoring your time wisely. So The arrangement is, of course, you've got that fantastic synthesis question. A lot of people think of this as a miniature research assignment. And then you have the rhetorical analysis. Now, this one's always my favorite. I love the rhetorical analysis. And then, of course, the argument option, which is sometimes kind of freeing, but you do want to be careful and mindful of your audience when you look at that free response topic. So you want to know the real deal. And the real deal is we have these new analytical 411 rubrics. So obviously 411 is like a 6-point rubric, but we're being instructed not to look at it that way. So we're going to look at it separately and just kind of see what those elements are tonight. So these are the task verbs that actually come from the CED. So from the College Board website, we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And I know it seems kind of like down there and kind of low, but I think it's great that College Board has come out to say, hey, let's have this common academic vocabulary. So analyze, they want you to examine methodically and in detail the structure of the topic of the question for the purposes of interpretation and explanation. When they tell you to argue your purpose, they want you to formulate a claim and support it with evidence. And if you follow Fiveable, we're going to be looking at how to build these types of writing throughout the semester. So we'll definitely give you more tips and tricks on doing that. And then for read, it wants you to look at or view all of the printed directions and all of the provided passages. So you want to look at every single part of it. When they ask you to synthesize, they're wanting you to combine different perspectives from the sources in order to support a coherent position. It's got to be arguable in some way, but you have to support that with solid claims and evidence that's going to be valid and logical and sound. And then you're going to, of course, write, or you're going to respond to it in writing. So let's look at the 3 types of essay, but really quickly. Does anybody know anything about these types of writing? Like the number of passages you might see or anything at all? What are you expected to do? Can you tell me in the chat? Well, conveniently, I have the slide for you. Okay, so if we are looking at the free response question details, we are going to start talking about the synthesis because that is question 1. So with the synthesis, you're looking at 6 to 7 texts. And 2 of those are going to be visual. At least one of them is going to be quantitative images or charts in some way. So you want to make sure that you're familiar with how to read charts and graphs and that sort of thing. And then one thing I always tell my students is remember what it looks like when somebody prints a picture or a chart out on a test page. You've seen that when you take the ACT or Plan or Explore or any test at all, when they print those pictures out, it feels like they're never the best quality. So you've got to do a great job at looking through those texts and really figuring it out. What is it saying? What is it about? And connecting it back to what you're doing. So the reading texts or the passages in this section are going to be about 500 words each. So if you're thinking 6 to 7 texts, including 2 visual, and the remaining ones are going to be about 500 words. So to get through that, you want to utilize that first 15 minutes really well, but you also need to have some academic stamina. Next, you're going to have the rhetorical analysis. Rhetorical analysis is, of course, going to focus on nonfiction text, and you're going to analyze how the language choices contribute to the intended meaning and the purpose of the text. So for this one, I like to think of what is this person saying and what did they want? So what is the desired audience movement at the end of this text? And then in that realm, you're trying to decide what are the things that are being done in order to achieve that goal. What are the things that are done in order to create that movement of purpose, okay? So, for example, when you are writing your letters to Santa, you are writing your letter to Santa because you want that thing, you want that gift. So you're trying to create that audience movement, even if that letter to Santa, you know, is going to your parents when you're doing it for the kids, okay? So you're looking at that audience movement. What is this person doing? Why is this person doing it that way? And then how is it impacting meaning? Next is argument. Now, argument is the one where my students always are super excited about it. What about you? Do you think you're really good at arguing? Can you show me in the chat? This is the one that I always want to caution my students on, because we think we're really good at arguing, but sometimes we get a little bit emotional and we lose the quality of our argument when we become emotional. So in the AP world, we don't necessarily want to see that 5-paragraph structure that you've been learning since kindergarten or whenever it was that your state starts. But what we do want to see is this progression from your position to your claim to your evidence, and then of course that warrant that justifies that piece. And in the argument world, they tend to ask questions that are a bit controversial. So for example, the two that really stand out most in my mind are the one looking at artifice, or last year talking about being overrated. So you want to keep in mind when you are building your argument, you need to keep that rhetorical triangle in mind, because you know who your audience is. When you are writing to the College Board, you probably don't want to say that College Board is overrated. You probably don't want to say standardized testing is overrated. So as you build your argument, you want to focus on your argument and focus on what they have, but you also, in the back of your mind, you really want to think about that rhetorical triangle for you. Who is your audience? How can you get your idea across? How can you create that audience movement? So, do you feel a little bit better about the types of questions? Any feedback on that? Anything in the chat? Okay, so we will go into a little bit more detail about what these look like now. Okay, so when you are looking at the synthesis essay, there's so much that we want to think about. So I think of the synthesis as sort of a mini research paper, and I have my students use MLA. Some have their students use the APA guidelines, but really, I think it really depends on what you're going to do, what your teacher wants. The goal here is that you have it and that you have cited it in some way. So if we kind of look at what we're looking for with the synthesis, you want to respond to the prompt with a thesis that establishes a lining of reasoning. So you've got to have a mental process that they can kind of see when they're reading it. And then you need to provide evidence from at least 3 of the provided sources. And of course, it has to support your thesis. Now, I'm going to point out to you, it says at least 3. So I tell my students, if you've got 6 or 7 or however many, you should at least in passing mention a couple extra, because 3 is like that bare minimum. And let's just try to reach up a bit. So you can very easily take that chart or take that image and build it into maybe your counter argument. Although the article, or although the image seems to suggest blank, text 2 does this. So you can kind of do that. You do want to clearly indicate the sources that are used. So you can still use direct quotation marks, you can still use paraphrase, and you can still summarize the information in those texts, but you do need to indicate where it comes from. So you might try the author's last name if you haven't, but you can very easily just say source A, source B, and go through it in that path. So once you start writing, you need to explain the relationship between the evidence and the thesis. So it's not just enough to have it there. You need to make sure that you have explained it. So when you're looking at building your argument, your teacher's probably going to talk about this old guy named Toolman and the frames of argument in terms of having a claim and having the evidence that supports it. And then they might talk about this warrant, the thing that makes sure that your evidence connects back to your claim. That's the piece that you want to make sure you have, not just in the synthesis, but in all of your writings, because that's the part that's going to do what we need to see here. That's the part that's going to explain the relationship between the evidence and the thesis. Next, you have to demonstrate an understanding of the rhetorical situation. It gets a little bit murky here. So who knows what I'm talking about when I say rhetorical situation? Can you tell me that? Okay, so in the chat, the question was heavily detailed sourcing is not necessary. So I sort of differentiate that with my students. I tell everyone at the beginning, I want you to at the least say source A. And when they first introduce a text, I encourage them strongly to give more information, because when we look at this last one, like I was just asking about the rhetorical situation, if you can go through and figure out the rhetorical situation of each one of those texts, you can bring that in as evidence in your synthesis. So yes, you can look at source A and you can look at source B, but what is source A, and how does the person who created source A help you out? So how does that make it a source that is worthy for your position in this overall grand scheme of things? Okay, does that answer that question? I think students definitely stress out about that citation, but the more practice you give them in the classroom, the better it's going to be. Okay. So I think we have a topic coming in the live stream later that is later in the semester that's talking about how in the world do you give so many opportunities for practice writing and give great feedback so the students can grow. So that's something that we will talk about in this semester. Okay, so that last piece is appropriate grammar and punctuation in communicating what that argument is. So again, synthesis, you've got multiple text. You want to pull them together. Your thesis needs to establish a line of reasoning. You've got to have evidence from at least 3, but surely to goodness, aim for 5. You can pull in something in passing. And remember, it's quality over quantity here. Okay, so FRQ 2 is the rhetorical analysis expectation. This is going to give a passage of nonfiction prose of around 600 to 800 words. And then you're going to write an essay that analyzes the rhetorical something, okay? Now, I have a blank there because you never really know. It's going to be the choices, the techniques, the strategies, any one of those things. But what you're looking at is, what does the author do to create audience movement? And in the realm of audience movement, how is that effective? How does it work? So that whole rhetorical triangle is going to work. The little context circle around the triangle, all of those things are going to play a big part in your rhetorical analysis. So what does AP expect of you? Well, they expect for you to respond with a clear thesis of the writer's rhetorical choices. So you have to clearly identify the claim that that person is trying to make. But then the second piece is you have to have a claim about that claim. So when I talk to my students about this, and I'm addressing this to all of my students, I'm always saying it's like metacognition. You're thinking about your thinking. So you're thinking about their thinking as you move through it. Okay, so when you see the word rhetorical, your understanding is that you're trying to impress the AP Lang reader with the understanding of the material. I think absolutely. So with that, and I'll just kind of go there right now, when you are looking at the rhetorical analysis, the big thing I would say is don't pull all of the evidence from one place. Don't do it. It makes it seem like you didn't read or you didn't understand or you don't have an idea. But break it up. Pull something from the beginning half or the middle and then the end so that you're bringing in a few different places. Because it's not just that you want to show them that you understand the material, because the ability to read and understand a complex text is like pre-AP. It's your ability to read, to understand, to analyze, to deconstruct the argument, and then to critique it. What makes it effective? Why is it effective? Was there some part of it that didn't work or part of it that did work? Now, I do tell my students that when you see it on the AP Lang exam, you can kind of assume that it is an effective argument and you should just take that stance. But I do have students who have told me, you know what, Ms. Kirk, I thought this was crap. I told them it was crap. I wrote that down. And then they scored fine. So I'm sorry, I dropped my clicker that I was using to click it. Yes, absolutely. It really helps to break down what the writing is in terms of what they expect of you before you even start looking at the prompts. So this exam overview is something I would recommend that you do with your students as well, because when they come in, they're stressed out, they're freaking out, they don't really know what to do. They need to know that A, you can do this. It might be a challenge, but we're going to help you get there. And then B, you believe in them. So that's a huge help. Okay, So coming back to the rhetorical analysis expectations outlined by the AAP College Board, you want to make sure that you're using evidence to develop and support your claim about the claim of that other text. And then you've got to give commentary or analysis to explain the relationship between that evidence and the thesis. So what I like about this particular idea is the Schaefer model paragraph is something that a lot of schools are doing, where you have your concrete detail, and then you have like the analysis of what that is, and then you have commentary to link that back to your topic sentence and to link that back to your thesis statement. And so that's a really good place to really look at it here, because remember, it's quality over quantity again. But you still have to demonstrate an understanding of the rhetorical situation. So you have got to, in your mind, know the people to whom you are writing, but you also have to know the rhetorical situation of the text that you've been given. So again, it's like that weird thinking about thinking. You are claiming about a claim, and then you're giving evidence about their evidence, and then you're commenting on that. Of course, the last expectation is that you use appropriate grammar and punctuation in communicating what your argument is. Okay. Do you feel better about the rhetorical analysis one? Can you give me like a little heads up on that? Excellent. I think the Santa Claus example is a really good one to solidify in the student's mind, what are you doing with the rhetorical analysis? So again, I will say this, with the new update, they don't necessarily have to know the name of the strategy, but they can describe the strategy. So they might say, the author uses a variety of tropes, or they could say, by using intentionality in the diction, the author creates metaphors to explain blah, 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 or the author compares and contrasts these ideas. So I think that's a huge help with this one. So when you're talking to your students, you want them to look at, number one, what is it saying? What is the person saying? And then like pull in some text evidence there with the what is it saying. So then from there, you want to look at, why is that person saying it that way? Why did they choose this specific allusion? Or why did they choose this thing that I don't know what it's called, but here's what it looks like in the text? And then that third piece, the piece that so often I think students struggle with, is the movement aspect of it. So you've got, what did they do? Why did they do it? And how did it actually work? Did it achieve that purpose? Did it achieve that goal? And in what way did it achieve it? So think about it in terms of what, why, and how, and you're going to do great on this one. Okay, so next is FRQ 3. This one is argument. I feel like I probably spend the majority of the time focusing on this one, but it doesn't necessarily follow through with the ease of writing. So a good resource for English as a second learner to use. Okay, I think the CED is a great stop, but I recently saw a document. I don't have it with me right now, but if you want to reach out to me on Twitter, and I've got my handle at the end, it's @Kirk's Corner. I saw a document where someone took the vocabulary from the new CED and ran through it and then compared it to the Oxford English Dictionary. And I think it's one of the new exam writers. And I don't care to send that link to you. So if you just reach out to me on Twitter, I'm @Kirk's Corner. Feel free to follow me or whatever, but send me a direct message so that I know who you are and how to get to you. And I don't have a problem with sharing that document with you. So that would be a great place, because it definitely addresses the vocabulary. And that can be a huge part. I believe there's actually a teacher stream coming up. I can't remember if it's the end of this semester or the start of next semester, but we are going to be looking at that vocabulary aspect. Okay, so FRQ 3. This is going to give you a short concept or idea or whatever, and then you argue a position about that thing using evidence. So the biggest thing you've got to have here is knowledge. You just have to know what's going on in the world. And I think this is where the current events streams are going to be very helpful. Some of your teachers may use the idea of re-Hugo. in terms of like, how do you build evidence? So things that you've experienced from real life, things from the entertainment world, things from history, things that are universally accepted concepts or ideas, things from governments, or things that you've observed. So you can bring in any of those elements as you look to build your argument. Again, quality over quantity, but you want to make sure that you're not using any of those logical fallacies that we critique in other writings. So again, respond with a clear thesis and a solid line of reasoning. You've got to have evidence, and then you've got to develop and support that claim. So again, whereas in the last one for rhetorical analysis, we analyze the what and the why and the how of somebody else, here you need to have your own what and your own why, and your how needs to be clear as well. So when I tell my students to build this argument, I always want them to leave that warrant in. When we teach argument, we teach analyzing argument, we think of it as the warrant is usually implied, because that's the piece that connects the claim to the evidence. So if this is the way it is because of this, I have my students take that aspect of sense and include that in there. And that's going to help to explain the relationship between your evidence and how it supports the thesis. So this is a pretty easy way to teach this, is to actually use images. Take a picture that you find from somewhere and say, this one was taken by a tourist from wherever. And then give everyone a different context, because context is important when you're building your claim for your own personal argument. So demonstrate an understanding of the rhetorical situation surrounding the ideas of the prompt. So whatever argument they give you, you've got to look at that aspect of the triangle. You've got to look at the context. But then when you are building your own argument, you have to think about your rhetorical situation. So when I'm looking at my context, I need to explain what my context is right now in my feeling with my opinion on this topic. But then I also want to look at my role as a speaker and my role in addressing the audience and my role in addressing the subject. And unfortunately, sometimes you might get a subject you really don't know anything about, like the artifice prompt. Students didn't even know what that was. So we've got to be able to prepare them to break down that prompt. Instead of focusing on what we don't know, let's look at what we do know, and let's go from there. So, of course, that last piece, the same all the way around, is appropriate grammar and punctuation in communicating the argument. So, any questions on that? Does that help? Is that one a little bit easier to do than the other? I think it kind of is. That's my opinion. Okay, so we're kind of rolling around to the end. Here is the general rubric information, okay? So, we definitely have in the world some very specific differences with the different types of rubrics that you see. But all of them have this divided into the 1-4-1. So row A is the thesis. It needs to have a defensible thesis. It needs to be arguable, but your position needs to be clear. Sometimes it'll say in the past, it has said to defend, qualify, or refute. And I tell my students, and I would advise you, don't qualify, because what happens is you write a paragraph about why it is and a paragraph about why it isn't. And then wherever you stand is somewhere in the middle. And so qualification, unless you really focus on it and you really develop that skill, probably best to not do that. Okay. So if you look at the row B is going to be your evidence and commentary. Again, it's 0 to 4 points, so not a lot of points here, but I wanted to kind of focus on that highlight. So you want to make sure that you've got textual references that's relevant to your thesis. So whatever you are trying to prove, bring in those pieces that do that. And you can do this with all of them, with the synthesis, with rhetorical analysis, and even with the argument. Even though with the argument, you're pulling in some stuff that maybe comes from experiences out with that idea of rehugo. So then you want to provide a well-developed analysis. What is it? Why is it? How is it? Make sure that you are very clear so that all of these pieces, your claim, your evidence, and then the warrant, the piece that connects these two, is very clear for what we're looking at. Next, you want to see that you explicitly explain the relationship between the evidence and the thesis, and the analysis is consistent, complete, and insightful. So try to bring in a broad spectrum, bring in evidence from the beginning, from the middle, and from the end, and really make sure that you have solidified whatever point you are trying to make. So there is the caveat, just like we had the caveat with the old rubric. Any writing that contains major errors that interfere with the understanding of the piece cannot earn a 4. So also, I kind of want to address handwriting right here, because I'm sure that if you are like me, there are some people who handwriting is really hard to read. But I've talked to a lot of readers and they do a really good job of trying to read it, but it is helpful if it's actually legible. An interesting thing that you can do with your students, or students that you can do on your own, go and look at the sample essays and the scores. See if you notice any trends between handwriting and where they fall in this rubric in terms of what you're going to look at. It tends to, by that third essay in particular, sometimes my students will say, well, I was just so rushed by the time I got there, I don't even know if it was legible. So try to focus on that as you go through. And if you can provide your students with the opportunity to sit down for 3 hours and 15 minutes and feel that stress so that they know how to face it on test day, that's going to go a long way in terms of helping them all around. Okay, so that row C is sophistication. So the idea behind sophistication is that you have crafted a thesis that demands a nuanced consideration of textual evidence and successfully proves it. So you're kind of looking at putting all of the little pieces together here. We're looking at explaining the relevance of the interpretation in a broader context, recognizing and accounting for the contradictions and the complexities. So in this aspect, this is where we look at the idea of refutation or of concession. Concede a little bit. Jay Heinrichs, he says, let them win on points. Give them a little bit so they don't feel like 100% wrong. And I think that's what we're looking at here with the idea of sophistication. So you want to make sure that you make effective rhetorical choices and strengthen the force and the impact of your argument. So in question 2, you analyze the rhetoric that other person used. This right here, this sophistication idea, is analyzing the rhetoric that you use. So I always tell my students, look, this quarter, let's pick 1 or 2 rhetorical devices that you're going to use every single time. Try to put that in there. Try to make it work. And that's going to help in the long run because it's bringing in the rhetorical choices to strengthen your own argument. And then, of course, you want to utilize the prose style that's consistently vivid and persuasive and convincing or even outstanding. So I want to point out that row A and C are both 0 or 1. You either get it or you don't. So as you guys come in with Brandon in a few days and you look at what that row involves a little bit more, it's 1 or it's a nothing. And then in that row of evidence and commentary, you can kind of work your way up to that idea of the 4. All right, questions on any of that in the rubric? Do you feel a little bit better about it? I know it's kind of scary because it's new, and sometimes new things can be really terrifying, but it's completely and totally obtainable as you go through and you study it and you master it. And I have faith in you. Okay, so looking at the next thing, what can you do? What are your next steps? First of all, participate in class, participate in Fiveable. If there's something you're struggling with, go back in the archives, watch a live stream from the past, reach out to any one of us. I'm on Twitter at Kirk's Corner, so you can reach out to me, whatever you want to do. Hi. And then, of course, you want to practice it. Practice it in class. Look at the CED. Go through and try it and really put forth your best effort because you want to own your own learning here. You really want to be a visible learner. You want to look at it and you want to think, okay, what do they want from me? How can I get that? And the more you practice, the better you're going to get. The next thing I would say is really look at progress monitoring. Your teacher should have you all kinds of set up this year for AP Classroom. If you're not on AP Classroom, I'm sure it's coming. It was just released like on August the 1st. So your teachers probably got you set up. If you're not in there, ask about it. Get on there, play around. You're going to have progress checks along the way. And then your teacher can give you different practice activities as well. You can always look up things on YouTube. You can buy any kind of a test prep thing that you want. Realistically, the internet is your friend. We at Fiveable are your friends. Like, we're going to help you to make this approachable. And then, of course, the tips to prepare, you want to make sure that you are using Fiveable, okay? Use us. Focus on the revision process. There are going to be a lot of little pieces along the way. So look at that revision. If you finish your essays early, it's 3 hours and 15 minutes. If you finish one of them early, you can super easy go back and make some proofreading marks. Make it look like you are looking back over your writing and you are changing it a little bit. Use AP Online, I just mentioned that, but consider your growth between steps because you will always be better the next day than you were on that first day. And if you truly apply yourself, you are going to do well and you're going to get this credit. So consider peer and self-editing. Look at your assessments. Once you have it done, don't ever wait until the last minute. For my students, every single essay is a timed essay first, timed at 40 minutes. From there, we'll do peer review, and from there, we'll do independent review and all of that extra stuff. But they need to get in that process of what it's going to be like. When you're looking at the AP multiple choice part, try to really look at your passages, time yourself. A lot of teachers are saying try for 8 to 12 minutes per passage. Don't leave anything blank. Really go through it and process it. Look at some revisions for some mock essays. And so that sounds kind of crazy, but what I mean by that is look at the College Board released FRQs. Right now with the new rubrics, there's not as many out there as there will be along the way, but you can still go back and look at the old ones. Even with the old rubric, you can look at it and you can say, okay, this is an example of successful writing. This is not an example of successful writing. So even though it's a different rubric, you're still going to see those pieces to help you along the way. And then, of course, writing conferences. Work together. Work with your teacher. Ask questions when you get a grade. Ask questions when you have the assignment. Focus on the prompt, and you can do it. Does anyone have any questions or any other thoughts that maybe you want to put in the chat for some other people for how they can prepare? I could write them down and share them with my students. All right, friends, that said, unless you have any questions for me, I think I'm going to let you go just a little bit early. But if you have anything you want, I know that we talked about the one resource about the vocabulary. Follow me on Kirk's Corner. Of course, make sure you're following Think Fiveable because that's a great resource. And they're going to share everything with you about all of those different, the different resources, the different streams, the different subjects. And then we're going to be ready to sign off. So any last questions before we say goodnight? Well, if that's the case, have a wonderful night. I look forward to seeing you in the next stream and in my next stream as well. Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. If you guys have any feedback at all, let me know. I want to make sure that I'm doing what I can to help you because I truly believe in you. I truly believe in College Board. And I really think that getting those credits in college helps on so many levels. Have a great night.